Good morning. This is a video discussion on the recap or sort of wrap up from for English 9 third quarter from chunks 1 to 5. For the chunk 1 for the third quarter, I gave you material about a one-act play. This one-act play was written by Alice Gerstenberg. I've provided a history or a profile of who Alice Gerstenberg is, and I bet you've known how great this person was or is. So for the story, one act play, it was entitled 14. And I do hope that you really read this piece because it's a nice one. If you've read the whole play, there is an exciting transition from Mrs. Pringle's decision, taking in, putting in and then taking out plates and chairs, depending on the calls that she got, depending on who had said no at the last minute for her invitation. And if you read the whole one-act play, you will see how important it was for Mrs. Pringle to be able to invite those people into her house, and then how much their attendance means a lot to her, given that she really prepared a lot. And then at the same time, we can also see or infer how capricious or indecisive Mrs. Pringle is, because she kept basing her decisions on the so-called standards of society, or what would the society say about her. At some point, in my personal opinion, it can be really disadvantageous, you base your decisions on, let's say, traditions. There are traditions because she does not really want to eat at a dining table with 13 chairs. Maybe that's a bad luck for her. There were too many superstitious beliefs, and there is even the standard of the society. It means a lot to Mrs. Pringle and who she can invite to her dining table. Okay? And she really prepared a lot for Elaine's debut. And then another thing that we can infer about Mrs. Pringle's character is that she is a woman who likes to think of people as a money's worth. Okay? So she even tried to set up Mr. Farnsworth for Elaine because she thinks highly of Mr. Farnsworth. But then Mr. Farnsworth was not able to attend and sent the Prince of Wales instead. And then she switched right away from wanting Mr. Farnsworth for Elaine to wanting the Prince of Wales instead for her daughter Elaine. Okay? So, Mrs. Pringle is undeniably ambitious. Being ambitious is a good thing, but sometimes it can be really disadvantageous because Mrs. Pringle in this one-act play is so conscious about what other people would say about her. Okay? I gave you questions after the one-act play, right? Some of you already answered. Maybe some have not yet answered. But I do hope that you've answered these questions here. Why is the play entitled as 14? Why did Mr. Harper send flowers to Mrs. Pringle? What does Mrs. Pringle think about herself as a hostess? I think I said much more about what does Mrs. Pringle think about herself as a hostess. I think I already mentioned that. And then why did Mrs. Pringle get mad at Mr. Farnsworth? Because Mr. Farnsworth was not able to attend, said no at the last minute, and she hates that. At the same time, I've already seen quite a glimpse of the perspective of those who prepare parties. I never knew that this is how it could mean much to them. The preparation, and then the people who are invited would just say no randomly out of nowhere, or even make excuses. For the first time, I somehow understood how frustrating it is for the hostess of a party. Okay? So, that is for your chunk 1. I hope you enjoyed this one-act play. There's really an exciting, personally for me, it was very exciting, an exciting transition of Mrs. Springle's mood, right? Her mood and even decisions kept changing. It's like, for a moment, Mrs. Springle gave me a headache. But that is a good thing, because it means that this one act play is really that effective for giving me such kind of impression. I hope it has also given you an impression. Next, for the chunk 2, second chunk, I introduced to you the elements of drama. There's tension, rhythm, mood, conflict, climax. I hope you read these elements, though there can be more, but focusing on conflict, I think we all know what conflict is. It's a problem, right? Conflict, in terms of drama, can be classified into many. One is man versus man. We have movies like, what movies can we classify? Wherein the conflict that arises is between a man to another man, or man versus man, or people versus people. Okay? Just like Kadenang Ginto, that is, I think we all know what Kadenang Ginto is. That can be classified into man versus man. People fighting over money, inheritance, and so on. Then we also have man versus himself. Man versus himself is mostly found in psychological movies. This is where a person struggles with his or her own self because of psychological issues. That can be one. Black Swan, if you've watched the movie, is, I think, an example of a man versus himself. It was all psychological. The conflict was all inside the main character's head. Okay? Man versus nature, we have 2012. Was it 2012? It was End of the World. So it was man versus nature. This one is can also be mostly found in movies like survival movies. How do men survive apocalyptic phenomenon, or when there's an earthquake? We have movies about this, and when there's a tidal wave, and so on. And then man versus technology. WALL-E, for example, WALL-E, that is a Disney movie. If you've also watched, the conflict there arises between us and technology, the technology that we created, which ended up manipulating us instead. Okay. So I've also given you tips about communication strategies, what to do when you give opinions, when you agree and disagree, when you show interest, when you make suggestions, when you take turns, and when you speak through gestures. For the guidelines for communication strategies for giving your opinion, you may start with, in my opinion, for me personally, I think you've heard those statements from me, expressions from me. I've mentioned personally, or in my opinion, or for me. Okay? Asking for someone's opinion. How do you ask? Do you agree? What do you think? What's your view? Or when you express agreement, you say, that's right, absolutely, exactly. So these tips are very helpful in conveying what you think of a particular issue, okay? Or a movie, or any topic you want to express your opinion on. There is also the communicating through non-verbal language, wherein you use your gestures, but it has to be appropriate gestures. Our gestures actually differ from one country to another because we have different cultures, and what is acceptable in the Philippines might be offensive in other countries. So I think you've encountered this maybe in some movies that you watch, or in some books that you read. And there is this country, I think, where smiling at someone is interpreted as flirting with that someone. But in our country, it's a way of politely greeting a person, or of being friendly, because the Filipinos are being known for hospitality and for being friendly, approachable. So maybe that's why we do it, we smile. But to other countries, smiling can mean flirting with someone. That is somehow offensive Okay? Or you might be misinterpreted. Maybe to a really liberated or open-minded country, you might get an instant boyfriend or girlfriend. Okay, that was just a joke. So, I also ask you to practice these English or these English sounds because you have a and then your I. Okay? So, I hope you practice this one. Think big, pick the disc, spill the ink, lead in the circuit, and so on. Same thing with your a sound. This one is your a. You say think tank, Adam's apple, last batch. So if you notice in English, maybe one way of sounding native is for you to exaggerate. We have many vowel sounds in English more than we ever think of. Okay, because in Filipino, in Tagalog, or even in Bisaya, we just have a, e, I, o, u in Filipino, for example. That's why we don't say mama, because we don't have a in our vowel sounds. Unlike in English, there are so many sounds which we have to consider because not producing the sound appropriately could alter the meaning of the word. Okay, so which is why that is very important. So that's for your second chunk. For the third chunk, I gave you another one-act play, I think. Yeah, by Percival Wilde. Another one-act play about family relationships and personal plans. This is also a nice one-act play. I hope you read this one, entitled His Return. This was about a married couple, Mr. I think Hartley and Mrs. Hartley. So Mr. Hartley here is a soldier. He is a soldier who has been gone and hasn't seen his wife for 3 years. Mrs. Hartley here has long waited for her husband. Okay, so this is another beautiful one-act play of a reunion between a married couple who haven't seen each other in 3 years. Imagine, 3 years. At the same time, this also talks about the differences between men and women. Because as Mrs. Hartley portrayed here in the one-act play, she portrayed a bit, or maybe a lot, about a woman's insecurity. She was very excited about her husband's homecoming. She really prepared a lot for it, and she wanted to wear the dress she worn when she bade goodbye to her husband 3 years ago. But then, looks like the dress no longer fits her, so it became a problem to her. So that's an example of a man versus himself. Mrs. Hartley has a conflict between her and herself. She does not like to be seen by her husband as being old and fat. Okay, she knew that she has changed physically, and she thought that it would make her husband go find another woman. But that was the opposite, because Mr. Hartley there in the one-act play portrayed a loyal man. Okay, so that's the differences between a man and a woman. Women tend to be naturally, jealous or insecure because of the changes in our body. Okay, even if men do change and even age, they don't really portray such insecurity as much as women show their insecurity. I even provided questions about this one-act play. I hope you read this. As you notice, I've been providing many one-act plays, which I hope can mold or enhance your imaginative skill. Because whenever we read, we tend to imagine, and that's how we give exercise to our brain. Okay, when we think, when we imagine, we exercise our brain. So I hope you've answered already these questions. For the fourth chunk, I introduced to you about the logical fallacies. This is an interesting one. On Facebook, we can see many statements that contain many fallacies, but then we do get misguided because we think that whatever is written on Facebook, posted on Facebook or other social media platforms are already true. Okay? But there are many fallacies there. Even with our statement, whenever we try to justify ourselves, we tend to create fallacies. So a fallacy is generally an error in reasoning. It's not logical, therefore this should be avoided. Okay? First one is, for example, you have ad hominem. That is a personal attack. That is an argument based on the perceived failings of an adversary rather than on the merits of the case. We tend to do this a lot. So, for example, you say Peter can't have followers because, as the former chairman said, he's unapproachable. We tend to judge the person based on what he or she has done in the past. Like, not giving credits to someone anymore because that someone has already committed, let's say, a mistake or even a crime in the past. That is a fallacy, or that is an error in our reasoning, because we cannot conclude that that person is no longer worthy of a particular position just because he or she made a mistake in the past. Next, ad misericordiam. So this one involves feelings. We tend to make use of our feelings just to sound logical or just to convince other people. For example, my grandmother is sick, so I'm positive I really need the job, so I'm positive that my work will meet your requirements. And people, most of us, tend to really sympathize, right? We would feel bad, for example, in this case, we would feel bad if we wouldn't hire the person just because he or she said that he or she has a really big problem. Like this one, her or his grandmother is very sick. So we tend to sympathize, covering now the real issue, which was to hire someone with or who can really meet the job requirements. Okay? And then we even have bandwagon, wherein you think it's right just because everyone's doing it, okay? But it's not. It's like following the fish in the sea. We have to think on our own and weigh which we think is right, which we think is wrong, and so on. So we have many more. For this chunk, I gave you a task, which was to provide your own statement, and then you will identify what fallacy is present in the statement, and then you provide your reason. Okay, you recall at least one statement or a dialogue that you've seen or watched, and then you identify and then explain the reason part of the chart below why there is an error in reasoning. Okay, next, for the last chunk, I gave you a material about gerund. So as you may see here, you may think that the gerund here is a verb because it's in a verb form ending in ing. But the gerund form here is not technically used as a verb, but is used as a noun. So for example, sewing has never interested me. We may think that sewing is a verb because it is in its verb form, even ending with ing, but sewing there is taken as a subject. It's treated as a noun. The act of sewing. We are referring here to the act of sewing. So you say, sewing has never interested me. This serves as a subject that is used as a noun. So if you are asked to identify what the subject is, what the noun is, you can say sewing. Another one, her enthusiastic cheering drew people from yards away. So we have here cheering as your gerund form, which is used as a noun, but her enthusiastic there is a modifier or an adjective, let's say, saying more, modifier, saying more, telling more about what kind of cheering. So her enthusiastic cheering. I even gave you a practice exercise wherein you have to underline the gerund and box the gerund phrase in each sentence. For example, in number 1, you use a box because eating Singaporean food is a gerund phrase. It started with a gerund eating, I like eating, but it's identified as a phrase because it has more details. eating what? So eating Singaporean food. So that's a phrase, group of words. For number 2, recycling gives our family a sense of accomplishment. Here probably you answered. Okay, I will not discuss the answers because some of you would submit really late. Okay, so and so on. So I will just check your work the next time around. That was just your practice exercise, by the way. So for the final task, you were asked to choose a topic of your interest, be it about COVID-19, online class, and so on. And then you are to write a title and a paragraph. Your paragraph, 5 sentences minimum and maximum of 10 sentences. You should have a paragraph that contains at least 5 gerunds and or gerund phrase. So it can be 5 gerunds or 5 gerund phrase. Basta 5 all in all. Or 2 gerunds and then 3 gerund phrase, or vice versa. Okay? I hope you learned a lot from chunks 1 to 5, even if it means learning on your own. Okay? So I intended to record this video since every time we do try to meet online or conduct a virtual class, not every one of you can participate. So I just recorded my supplemental material for chunks 1 to 5. This is just supplemental. It means I just added maybe some ideas which are not found in the materials I sent, okay? Just to enhance your understanding of the materials. Thank you everyone and be safe.